I don't want to say it, but he told us so. The Great Reset, the battle for global supremacy, and the war on cash is all happening. Frank Giustra warned us about all of this, and on top of it, he's been telling us about a little-known law that will transform the gold market forever, and it's coming this summer. It's called Basel III, and it's about to make gold the hottest asset in banking. Right now, gold is a risky Tier 3 asset in the US, valued at just 50% on bank books. But on July 1st of this year, Basel III upgrades gold to Tier 1 status equal to cash and government bonds. So is Basel III setting up a new gold-backed monetary system? Well, he's back today to tell us more. Frank Giustra, CEO of the Fiore Group, global philanthropist and co-chair of the International Crisis Group. Frank, it's not Oviedo, but I'll take it. So good to see you.
It's nice to see you too, always.
Look, I had to have you on with everything shaping up. Like I said, it was 2 years ago that you first were warning us about the reset, of how things were shaping up towards a two-tier system, somehow perhaps backed by gold. My first question to you before we take this deep dive is, are we at the threshold of a new monetary system here?
Yeah, I think, and here's the thing. Here in North America, just the way that the media treats this issue, this subject matter, most investors are going to be completely unaware that we're entering a brand new world. And, I started talking about this more than 2 years ago. Actually, it was 3 or 4 years ago that I started to talk about the reset that was coming. And at the time, most people ridiculed the idea that we would have anything other than a U.S. dollar-based system globally. The acronym of choice was TINA. There is no alternative. Everybody used it. Anybody that suggested otherwise was ridiculed. I was ridiculed a lot, and I think that, and it's unfortunately for most investors in North America, they're not really getting the full story. You will never see the kind of information that you and I are going to talk about today in the mainstream media. Okay, it was only recently that under the new Trump administration, they more or less admitted that de-dollarization is a real thing and it's going to have an impact. I mean, Trump wouldn't have threatened the creation of BRICS currency otherwise. He threatened to impose 100% tariffs if any countries decided to think about creating a BRICS currency. I don't think that that's what's going to happen right away. I think there are other mechanisms in place now that are used to bypass the U.S. dollar system. And even Mark Rubio came out and said recently that sanctions, 5 years from now, sanctions are going to be ineffective because the whole world is moving away from the U.S. dollar and creating alternative systems. And these systems are led by China, which is the leader of the BRICS movement. And there are a number of systems that are being used. And more and more, gold is playing a role in this. And this is the part that I think people better become familiar with, because gold, in one form or another, is going to play a role in a new global monetary system. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a gold-backed currency. Gold can be used in other ways, and I'll explain a couple of the ways that it can be used. But what we're seeing today with the gold price is really a reflection that it is recognized internationally as the only neutral, universally accepted monetary instrument that is evenly distributed around the globe. And this is what everybody runs to when the fiat system starts to fray, which it has been doing, especially with concerns about the U.S. dollar. Now, with respect to your question about the Tier 1 asset with the banks, everyone outside of the U.S. has already accepted the Tier 1 asset. And it's just the U.S. that held out. And there are probably a couple of reasons for it. But come July 1st, banks in the U.S., the biggest banks, will be able to use gold as a Tier 1 asset. And that has incredible ramifications, because right now it can only provide a fraction of the loan value as a Tier 1, as a Tier 3 asset. You mentioned 50%. the president of the World Gold Council told me that banks get discounted up to 85% on their gold holdings as collateral. So this may answer the question, by the way. Everybody was wondering where all this gold was, the physical gold has been coming into the U.S. now for, it started late December and it's still ongoing. And I've heard all sorts of numbers. Is it 600 tons? Is it 1,300 tons? Is it 2,000 tons? No one really knows for sure, but it's an incredible large sum of physical gold that's coming to the U.S. And no one could figure out really the reasons why. And I can think of several, but one of the reasons is that the big banks are getting ready for Tier 1 classification on gold and bringing in their gold into the U.S. so they can use it as part of their collateral system.
Well, that would make a lot of sense. I really think that would make a lot of sense. I want to go back to what you said about the delays, Frank, because you're absolutely right. The U.S. has been delaying this. My thoughts are because, they want to delay it because as soon as it's implemented, basically it shows it will basically kill the supremacy of the dollar, if I could be so frank.
Well, it may not kill it completely, but it certainly will damage it a lot, because the minute the U.S. accepts that gold is a Tier 1 asset, it's saying that it's money. And gold has always been money. It's only in the last, if you think about it, we've been conditioned in North America for the last 50 years only. It's only in the last 50 years that we believe that gold is not money, since Nixon took us off the gold standard. But prior to that, gold was always money. And now my guess is that gold is going to come back as a monetary instrument in a recalibration of the global monetary system. And it's happening. And that's the reason why every central bank on the planet is buying gold in large quantities. And again, when you listen to the CNBCs of the world about what's happening with gold, they don't talk about that aspect of it. They talk about other issues related to gold. It's drowned out with, if you're afraid of the US dollar, buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not gold. It's something, it can go up, you can make money, but it's not gold. It doesn't behave like gold, with the exception of a couple of days during the tariff conversations. Bitcoin decoupled for a couple of days with the equity markets, but it's back. That lasted 2 days. Now, take today, for instance, where it was Monday morning. Bitcoin is way down, gold is way up, and the equity markets are in the red. And so it's behaving more like a risk-on asset. But the point I'm trying to make is that the U.S. media only talks about things like Bitcoin. They will never give gold the credibility that it actually deserves, because it is money, and it's money all over the world. And now it's going to be incorporated back into the monetary system. And what that means is that if you believe that, then gold is going to have to be a lot higher to act as money in trade settlement deals between countries. And this is where I think is going to play the primary role in the shorter term, until we get a global monetary reset that will last another 50, 100 years. And that's down the road. I don't know. That it's going to take a lot for the world to come together and agree to a monetary system as we did back in the Bretton Woods at the end of World War II. That's going to be very difficult in today's world. You got a bifurcated world with China on one side, the U.S. on the other, and Russia. You got other players, but basically it's China versus the U.S. in terms of trying to either maintain or achieve global supremacy, economic supremacy. So I honestly believe that gold will be used as part of, we discussed this before, the M-Bridge project, which was initiated by China, involved the UAE, Thailand, Hong Kong, and more recently Saudi Arabia. The BIS was part of it at the beginning. They backed off, I would imagine under pressure from the United States. But that M-Bridge project is basically central bank to central bank in local currencies to settle trade. So let's take, Saudi Arabia with China, for instance, could trade using the M-Bridge central bank digital currency to settle all Forex transactions. Now, the big criticism was always, well, why would they trade in local currencies? What are you going to do with a bunch of yuans you don't want, or a bunch of dirhams you don't want, or whatever the unwanted currency is? And the answer is that if you look at all those same countries that are either already in the M bridge, and there's another, by the way, 31 observing countries, are the biggest importers of gold. And like James Rickards once theorized with me was that, and he's absolutely right, is if you have unwanted, say you have a period of time of trade between two countries with a bilateral trade agreement, at the end of a certain period, one country ends up with unwanted currency in its trade surplus with the other country. Well, what do? You can settle it with gold. And what's adding credence to that theory, which I just saw the other day, is the Shanghai Gold Exchange is setting up warehouses around the world in order for that settlement to take place. They're going to set up warehouses with gold so that they can actually do that. So, they didn't announce it in that way, but they announced that they're creating all these warehouses. So that what it tells you that gold is going to play a role. And I think the easiest way is through the settlement of net trading between countries with unwanted currency. I think that that's where we're headed. And I think the demand for gold is going to have to increase if that's going to be its function.
Well, you brought up a good point about you'll need a higher gold price. And I want to go back to that point. And could there be any coincidence in the fact that the final stages of preparing for the Basel III endgame, which was January 1st, 2023, since then the spot gold price has jumped over 60%, Frank?
It's telling you something. There's a mad rush for physical gold. And let's make sure that we differentiate between physical gold and all that paper stuff that I don't touch with a 10-foot pole. Paper gold's not gold. It's some sort of a representation of gold. But if in a real crunch, you try and get your hands on that gold, it's not going to be there. Okay, in a real crunch, if things really go sideways. But that's the reason all of this gold buying, and now even the U.S. is bringing it back in, tells you that they're preparing for something. And I think that, and again, it depends. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it isn't the M-bridged settlement structure that I just described. Perhaps it's a backing of a currency to a certain percentage, much like we did pre-World War II. Somewhere between 20 and 40% backing based on your M1 money supply. But if that's where we're heading, and it's a BRICS-led initiative, and you don't have the U.S. on side yet, then I think that in order to have that backing, you're going to need gold to be much higher. And I've seen numbers ranging anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 an ounce. And that may sound crazy to most people that are listening to us today, but it isn't crazy in terms of its historical performance. If you look at the period between 1971 and 1980, it went up 27-fold. Between 2001 and 2011, gold went up 8-fold. And so the idea that gold could go up, say, pick a number, and these are numbers, they don't mean anything. I'm speculating because no one has any idea. But in order to back a certain amount of the money supply, gold's going to have to be a lot higher, whatever that number is. I never predict gold prices, as you know, but it's certainly going to be a lot higher than $3,000 an ounce.
Yeah.
And that's why, and I think that part of the reason that we, the investing public, are not being told that is because they don't want us to own it. It's not about individuals.
Because they need it.
They need it, and they don't want you to front run it. If they came out and told you the plan tomorrow that gold is going to play a role, some kind of a role, everybody'd rush in. So what are they telling you? Buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, but I'm just, when you're saying you need gold, demand's going to go up. Do you think, how are you going to get enough gold for that system? We know it's below ground, but Frank, you know better than anyone. You can't just bring it up.
Yeah. Well, it depends who we're talking about, Daniela. Let's talk about China for a moment, which has official gold reserves of 2,200 tons. And I've been telling you and everybody for years and years and years and years, maybe 10, 15 years, they have a lot more than that. They just don't disclose it. And they have a reason they don't disclose it, because there's a purpose to getting as much gold as they can. And at some point, we will learn how much they have when they need to tell us, because there's going to be a use for gold in their monetary system. I said this for a long, long time. Everybody laughed. But Goldman Sachs just came out with a report recently saying that China probably has 10 times more gold than they're officially reporting. And that's Goldman Sachs. So, I believe that at some point, China, which is the largest gold producer in the world and largest gold importer in the world, will disclose what they have when it's necessary to disclose it. Okay. The U.S., who knows, do we have 8,100 tons? Probably. Is it pledged in various different ways to other mechanisms, leases and whatever? Maybe. Was all this gold purchase that happened over the last 3-4 months, is that government sanctioned purchase?
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. No, I don't think anybody knows, because they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you. But even the U.S. is hinting that we're heading towards a new system, what I call the reset. And what we don't know is what that really means yet.
What that means. And I'll read you this quote from Treasury Secretary Besson, who basically told us what you're saying. Within the next 12 months, we're going to monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet.
Yeah.
Could he have been referring to anything other than gold?
I can't think of anything else that they can monetize in a way that gold can be monetized and used both for trade and for credibility. Okay. Maybe there are other assets, obviously, but I really think that if you understand his history, the Treasury Secretary, he understands what gold is. He gets it. Okay. Now he hasn't been able to say anything about it, and why would they? They're not going to say anything until they need to say something. In the meantime, they'll keep us in the dark.
About keeping us in the dark, exactly that. Because in my research of Basel III, I think the only thing I found on mainstream media is they were just saying this mundane change, like don't even bother looking it up, is going to happen July 1st. But obviously, based on what you're saying, Frank, it has a lot more to do than just bringing stability to the banks. It's much bigger than anything they're telling us.
Yeah, because the U.S. knows that in terms of the U.S. dollar, they know they're in trouble. They know that the reserve status is slowly slipping away, and they have to do something, especially with the gargantuan deficits that they're running. We're already going to be over $1 trillion in interest payments. I mean, it's just insanity how much debt is being added every year. I predict that we're going to have a $2 trillion deficit this year, maybe a $3 trillion, because they're promoting these tax cuts now that are going to add another $20 trillion to the debt pile over the next 10 years. We're going to be at $57 trillion in 10 years. I mean, that's insanity. That is, we all know it's unsustainable. They've kept it kind of under wraps for a long time that it wasn't really a problem. Deficits are not a problem, debt is not a problem. But now the world's starting to wake up, especially with these tariff threats now and all the sanctions previously. People are going, you know what? We need to find a different system, an alternative, a backup, something where we can't get sanctioned, where we can operate outside of the system. And I think that the American policymakers are very much aware of that now. Maybe they were aware of it before, but they certainly didn't talk about it before. But now it's been talked about. And so, again, I think it'll happen sooner than we all believe. Okay, there's going to be some sort of a new approach to the dollar before Trump's term is up, for sure. Okay, and so that's coming, and the world is heading in that direction anyway. I've already told you what the de-dollarization movement is intact. Even Japan started selling treasuries, and even Japan started threatening the U.S. that if they go through with these tariffs, they're going to weaponize what they have, which is the largest treasury holdings in the world, $1.1 trillion.
Okay, I have two major questions for you based on all of this now. One, if once, come July 1st, once Basel III is in effect, if this could really undermine the power of the dollar, and we know the US has delayed, why are they going through with it? Why have they been backed into a corner? Couldn't they just say, we don't want to adopt it?
I think they finally have, again, I'm guessing, I don't know what they're thinking, but my guess is that they figured out that they can't go this alone. If the world's going in one direction, and they see the writing on the wall, and the writing's been on the wall for a long time, and I've been talking about it, but investors have refused to see it, but maybe the government's seeing it now or has seen it, and they have no choice but to have, whether it's a backup plan or whether it's their own plan, gold. They realize that gold's going to have to play a role. They have to have it just in case. They have to have enough of it. That's got to be available and physical and repatriated into their vaults in the U.S. Especially if the world starts to really fray with respect to geopolitical tensions and trade wars and currency wars. You want to have that gold in your vaults in your home country.
I find it terrifying, Frank, what the Bank of International Settlements knows. And again, we can just guess here. But it's not about preventing the next crisis. It's almost as if they're preparing for the coming crisis.
Either preparing for it, I agree, either preparing or getting ahead of it. And so if they were smart, they would get ahead of it. Now, politicians are politicians. They'll always take the easiest path. But I think that they're definitely preparing for it. Whether they initiate it or not, I don't know. I don't know how they can initiate it given all that's going on geopolitically right now, with all the tensions around the world, and with Trump's threats to almost every country on the planet. How do they get everybody on side on, say, a Plaza Accord style meeting like they did in 1985, where the U.S. was mostly Germany, France, and Japan, to strengthen their currencies to improve America's export business. Japan will never do that again. That was a huge mistake for Japan. They strengthened the yen in 1985. They've never been able to look back. They were becoming the biggest economy in the world at one point, and basically they were stopped short. But I don't see in the environment that you can have a Bretton Woods or a Plaza Accord. So the U.S. has to think about how do they do it on their own or with some sort of a coalition. I don't know what that coalition would be. It would be a hell of a trick after all the berating and threatening and extortion that the Trump administration has put on the rest of the world with respect to tariffs. I don't know how they get a consensus.
Can you have a weak dollar and still be the reserve currency of the world?
And this is the interesting dilemma. I think I call it. I think it's Trump's. He's got a number of Sophie's choices out there, and they're all bad. If you think about what he's trying to do, go walk through what he's trying to do. He's trying to lower the cross-currency rate of the U.S. dollar versus other countries. Okay, so lower its value vis-a-vis other countries' exchange rates in order to improve his export manufacturing business that he's trying to create. But at the same time, not lose the reserve status. Try and keep that as long as possible, because if they do lose it, you do understand what that means. That is, I've always said, that's going to be an existential threat to America. Losing a reserve status completely would mean much higher interest rates, much higher inflation, a lowering of the standard of living, and most importantly for the American government, the loss of power around the world. The U.S. wields a lot of power by having its reserve currency being the U.S. dollar. And so I would think that they won't want to lose that, or they will want to mitigate the decrease of the power of the U.S. dollar over time. They're trying to do both at once, and they kind of conflict. So I don't know how they're going to achieve it. Obviously Trump's preferred method would be to have the Fed lower interest rates, because if you lower the interest rate, the dollar will go down against other currencies. And certainly the tariffs and the tariff threats have pounded the dollar down. I'm not sure that was intentional, but it's certainly doing the job of reducing the value of the dollar vis-a-vis other currencies. But, I always look at those things as, you shouldn't even look at that. Cross-currency rates between fiat currencies are nothing but a sort of a floating abstraction out there. They're meaningless because there's nothing backing these currencies. So one may go up. To try and determine value through cross-currency rates is a fool's game. The only real money in the system is gold because it's constant. It has a constant value relative to currencies, and it goes up and down relative to the financial condition of that country. And if you want a perfect example of what happens when fiat starts to fail in the eyes of the domestic audience, look at Turkey and Argentina, look at Zimbabwe. Two things happen. First of all, you get very high inflation. And the second thing is the gold price in those currency terms goes up substantially. Like in Argentina, went up 10 times during its inflationary period, the last 4 years or so. Turkey went up 5 times. So that's how you see gold. Gold is the constant. All fiat currencies are nothing but abstract variables that go up and down relative to gold. And if you get that in your head, that is the constant. It is the money. Everything else is an abstraction, but it has to be connected to the gold price, and the gold price will tell you the health of that system.
I'm happy you brought that up, because I know that was my question to you, is I don't get the pound sterling, the strength of the pound sterling, the strength of the euro, given the economies. And that was your answer.
That is the answer. Because, people go into currencies to park money in currencies for lots of reasons. You do it because you're buying an asset in that country, as shares or bonds or whatever. You're doing it because the interest rate differential between countries is better in one country than another. Lots of reasons that you move money around, but it doesn't tell you anything about the health of the economy. Like a strong dollar the last couple of years does not tell you the underlying structural problems that America has. I mean, it's slowly going bankrupt, but you would never be able to tell by the fact that the dollar was trading at 110 or 115 in the DXY. That doesn't tell you, it doesn't tell you what's going on. People ran to the dollar because of its liquidity. It's, it's a big, big market. And they were getting with interest rates going up, they were getting a great return. And that's the only reason they're parking money, but it doesn't tell you anything about the fundamentals of that country. Yeah. Only gold is the only whistleblower. It'll tell you everything you need to know. And that's why they don't like to talk about gold when it's going up, because it's basically whistleblowing on how terrible that economy is or the financial system. There's something wrong. Gold is telling you there's a lot wrong. The more it goes up, the more there's something going on that's really wrong with the economy or the financial system or the currency. So I think you got to just get that out of your head. These currency rates mean nothing. They're all fiat currencies. They're all backed by nothing. And they're all being abused through money printing and easy money policies, and the debt of those countries are all exploding. Whether it's Europe or whether it's America, everybody's debt is going through the roof.
I want to zero in on your point about this war on cash that we're seeing. We saw the historic blackout in Spain and Portugal.
Yeah.
We've never seen anything like it before, where folks could not access cash, no access to the ATMs. I've brought this up in past interviews. I think the timing is bizarre given the sanctions now that Spain is also imposing if you don't advise their tax agency in time. If you want to do a withdrawal as low as 3,000 euros, you could be facing fines up to 150,000 euros. I think it should serve as a warning, Frank, and I know you lived it through Argentina, that where all of a sudden you have no access to cash, or you're fined if you're using cash, for example, or you can't pull out money from the ATMs. I think, do you not agree it should be a warning that this could happen here too?
It can happen. It's happened in many countries around the world. You're just seeing the most recent iteration of it, okay? But it's happened, I can name whether it's Greece or whether it was Argentina or whether it was even the UK in the 1970s, okay, that had capital controls, all sorts of means to restrict you from taking cash out um, exchanging for another currency, etc. Now, what Spain has done, which is really a war on cash, it's a war on cash. And by the way, I think Spain's not going to be alone. There's going to be a war on cash everywhere in the world because we're moving towards a digital central bank system for currencies in one form or another. The U.S. may be stable, who knows? But it's going to be a digital currency, and they don't want you to have cash. They'll obviously say the reasons are for money laundering purposes or tax evasion. But at the end of the day, it's about control. Once they can control all of your spending behavior, they control you. And if you look at the social credit system in China, which punishes people for bad behavior, you can kind of guess where we're heading. So if, let's say, and they'll use the excuse that they need to fine tune the economy. So they'll say, let's say a country A says, okay, from now on, no more cash for anybody. Okay, it's all digital, one form or another, credit card, but everything's traceable, and where the government can influence you to behave in a certain way. And that behavior may be to be allowed to buy certain things and not be allowed to buy others by punishing and rewarding you for your spending behavior. And I think that that's coming, okay, because they'll use the excuse, well, we need people to redirect the economy into this direction, so we're going to fine tune it. So, you can't buy, gas-fired cars. You got to buy an electric vehicle. I'm using, it could be a million and different things that they want to achieve.
Right.
That's, to me, that's a warning. And also, I think, if you look at the Frank Dodd Act in the United States and the fact that they can now do bail-ins, not bailouts, but bail-ins legally. If you got your money into a bank account and they can trace everything digitally, and they decide that, there's a financial crisis and the banks need a bailout and they'll no longer allow bailouts, so now they're going to do bail-ins, which means basically taking your money out of your account because you don't own that money. When you put your money in a bank account, you're loaning that bank your money. It's not your money. It's a loan. And so if the bank goes under, you're just another creditor. And so they, obviously there's the $250,000 part of it, which is insured in the U.S., but, who knows what would happen in a crisis. Governments will do all sorts of things when they're in a crisis. When they feel they have no choice in order to keep the system afloat, they'll take your money.
Wow.
And that's why I would say the only security against all of these things that we're talking about is physical gold. Okay, if you have physical gold, they can't, put their little greedy hands in there and reach it and take it out. They can try and do what they did in the 1930s and make it illegal. I read a study which was written by a very famous economist that only about 20% of the people in the 1930s turned their gold in. Okay, most people ignored the order, and it would be even worse today because back then they used to trust government was doing the right thing. Today the trust in government is pretty low, and they've seen all the tricks before. So I think that if you have your physical gold, and everybody should have some, the amount you can afford, whatever that is, have a little bit of physical gold available because in a real crunch, that's the only money you're going to be able to get your hands on.
Frank, you brought up the good point about the digital currency, and I had a professor from Madrid on to talk about the blackout in Spain and this war on cash, and he said it's another way to say, hey, if you had the digital euro, this wouldn't happen. And I said, well, wait, don't you need electricity for the digi-euro? And he said, no, that's the selling point. If you watch the video that the ECB put out, it's even in a blackout, how convenient a digital euro would still work. Don't ask me how.
I don't know how. Who said that? I have no how without electricity. How do you?
Yes.
How do you tap into anything that's digital? Nothing. I don't know how you do it.
Apparently, the ECB has a video, but I think it just, it's just interesting to show, like, even in a blackout, you'd still have access. So it's another selling point to lead people into that direction.
First of all, I don't buy it, but I'm not sure. And listen, here. We're in a world right now where two things you have to be aware of. One is that the infrastructure, the power grid in both Europe and especially America is aging and not able to cope So, you've got a failing power grid, especially in the U.S. You have all this electricity demand for AI and data centers now, which is going to outpace even Bitcoin energy needs. Okay. So, you've got the potential for failure of the power system, and then you have the threat of cyber attacks. If there's ever any real escalation of conflict between China and the U.S., guess what they'd go after first? It'd be cyber attacks on the power grid. It's the easiest thing to attack. And so, I don't know. Listen, call me old-fashioned, but if I'm sitting here in a crisis and I have a choice between money, fiat money, my bank account, Bitcoin, or gold, there's only one that can work without electricity, and that's gold. I mean, that's the only thing that,
That's what I think.
In a real crunch, like during that blackout, people couldn't take money in Spain. They couldn't take money out of their bank accounts, out of their ATMs. They couldn't go buy food. I mean, it was really.
They didn't have access to water. It was bad.
No. So you always
really,
keep.
really
I always say, always keep a little bit of cash at home because you need cash to buy everyday things, and keep gold because that's the only thing that protects your wealth that they can't confiscate. They can't with a push of a button. So I would say, that and some food, canned food. Keep that around.
Just wrapping here, Frank. I mean, look, it's very terrifying times. I have people writing in every day saying we don't know what we're going to wake up to, and I think you've made the case that really the only thing you can do to get some control back is to own some gold. I mean,
I can't think of anything else.
I know people are going to say you're talking your book, but it's more than that. It's not.
But debate me on that. Have anybody, Michael Saylor even, debate me on what happens during a power outage. No, but I'm just saying, if someone gave me an argument against my position on this, I would listen to it. But I thought this through very carefully, and I've been doing this for a long, long time. And I've studied history, and I know what happens. I know how governments behave when the poop hits the fan. They're ruthless. They don't, it's not about your well-being. It's about keeping the system intact.
I think the good thing is, Frank, I think your message is getting out. I mean, you saw Tucker Carlson is even covering the reset now. I mean, a few years ago, we couldn't even, up until last year, I would say you couldn't say the R word, right? Without someone thinking this was a conspiracy theory. So I appreciate you coming on to talk about the latest and to talk about July 1st because mainstream media is not covering it. And we'll see how it unfolds. On a lighter note, I had to ask you this because as the founder of Lionsgate, I'm sure you saw the news about President Trump wanting to bring Hollywood back and now place 100% tariffs on foreign films or films being made outside of the U.S. Any thoughts on?
Yeah, obviously I've got a lot of friends in the industry, and I had a lot of emails and texts this morning, with comments back and forth. First of all, I don't think it's been thought through, which is, pretty typical of this administration. They make these statements, but they don't actually think them through. There are so many questions of which part do you tariff, when a film is made overseas, but when it's brought in, it's not an asset. It's distributed around the world. I mean, who do you tariff? And did you tariff the production costs? I mean, there's co-productions. Someone sent me a menu of questions that remain unanswered.
Right.
I don't know how that's going to work. And certainly all the entertainment stocks are down today because of the statement. But I think the reality is this might be just one more Trump, declaration that, that doesn't really get traction because there's no intelligent way to apply those tariffs. And I just don't see how he's going to do it. But, he's with all these statements, whether they're thought through or not, they're creating damage in the business community, overall. I mean, everybody's, even lots of people that voted for Trump because they believed that he was doing the right thing, believe that the idea was right, but the execution is a mess. And I think they overplayed their hand with China. I think China is not going to blink. It will not flinch. I think this is for China. And, don't shoot the messenger here. I'm just telling you from understanding how Chinese culture mentality works. China's probably been looking for this opportunity. It's going to be a once in a century opportunity to set the record straight that they will not be bullied, that America cannot hurt them and contain them in the way that America's wanted to, and they will not. Everybody's waiting for the Chinese to call begging for tariff relief. In their minds, it represents U.S. exports represents 2.5% of their GDP. It's only about 12 to 13% of their exports, and they've been preparing for this since 2018 when the first Trump administration did the tariff stuff. They've been rejigging their supply chains, and I think they're willing to take the pain. And by the way, tariff wars hurt everybody. It's going to hurt the Chinese. It's going to hurt the Americans. Nobody wins the tariff war. Everybody gets hurt, okay? But I think that the difference here is that China is willing to take the pain to make the point and establish once and for all that Trump's blueprint of bullying the world with tariffs is not going to work. Because if they caved in now, they'd be basically caving in to future attacks by the U.S. So I think they're going to draw the line on this one. I really believe. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. I think China's going to be very tough. They're going to say, okay, even if we lose the American business, we will live. We're not going to die.
Interesting. Very interesting. I have another surprise announcement.
Okay.
You might not even know this, Frank.
I don't know this.
Okay. Well,
What?
I will be joining you at Rick Rule's Natural Symposium Conference, July 7th to the 11th, Boca Raton, Florida. Frank Giustra is going to be there. I'm moderating the panel you're on.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Honestly,
Yeah,
Rick didn't tell me that. Oh, he didn't tell me.
Jim Rickards, obviously Rick, Danielle DiMartino Booth, Nomi Prims, Rob McEwen. I mean, just what a lineup of
That's going to be insane. Is Rickards on my panel?
I don't know who else is on the. I don't know who else is on the panel.
Okay,
but I'm ready for it.
Well, I'm ready for it too because we'll make it very entertaining and informative. I think that.
But I just want to bring it up because the public has always been saying, when can I meet Frank? Or we've taken this across the world, our tour, Frank. So if you want to come and meet Frank finally in person and ask him questions, this is the place, folks.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm coming directly from Europe, and it'll be great. I've never done Rick Rule's conference. Obviously, Rick and I have known each other for 40 years. We're good friends, and we banter a lot. But I've never been to the conference, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so am I. So there you go, folks. We'll fire in the link. Sign up, be there. You can meet all of us, and we'll all have a great time in Boca Raton. Frank.
Yes.
I don't like doing it like this because we're so far apart, but I'll take it. I'll bring it home for us. Just, any final thoughts for the folks at home?
Again, I think, and I always hated when people called me a Chicken Little, because I've been writing about this stuff for over 20 years, okay, as you know, and I've been doing these interviews for over 20 years, and I've been predicting the kind of outcome we're seeing today. I've been talking about that for a very, very long time. And I remember a lot of people would say, Frank, you're just Chicken Little. You stopped inviting me to dinners because I was so depressed to listen to. But folks, Here we are, okay? And I mean this, here we are. This is serious, okay? And it means a lot to your ability to survive financially in the world that's about to unfold. And if you don't get your act together and protect yourself, no one's going to do it for you. There will be no bailout for individuals. None. You're on your own. And they'll come up with all sorts of reasons and excuses and people to blame when the poop finally hits the fan, but you'll be on your own. So it's your responsibility to protect yourself in any way you can. And you can protect through diversification, all sorts of things. Just don't do anything dumb like buying very, very expensive, overpriced tech stocks that have already had a huge run. Diversify geographically, monetarily, and make sure you own some gold. Some gold. It doesn't have to be a lot, but enough that it's going to protect you.
Inquiring minds want to know, in this run up to over $3,000 gold, did Michael Saylor give you a call?
No, he hasn't called yet. I don't expect him. As I've told you many times, he will never do a debate with me under the conditions that will be different than our last debate, okay? Which means it has to be live, on stage, unrehearsed, taped so that we can show the world afterwards. He will never, and no teleprompter for him, okay, to read all of his stuff. I want to debate him on one very simple point. He keeps talking about gold. The latest thing is that gold is the king of garbage investments. I honestly want to take that quote with his photo, frame it, and send it to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. So decades from now, scholars and historians could go back and laugh about it like they did with tulips, okay? Because it's honestly the insane stuff that he's saying about, $500 trillion of global assets are going to flow into Bitcoin. I mean, you have to have an IQ of 20 to believe that stuff, but he has a following. And they're pumping. And again, you want to buy Bitcoin because you think it's going to go up? Great. But please don't tell us that it's gold. It does not behave like gold. It never has. It's never really been tested in a financial crisis where currencies are going to get nailed and where the US dollar gets nailed. It's never been tested in that. And if you think governments aren't going to try and protect their currency under fire, you're very mistaken. And I think Bitcoin is easier to attack than physical gold. That's all I'm saying. You buy Bitcoin, make money, get rich, have fun, but please don't compare it to gold because it's not.
Well, I hope Rick Rule won't mind. I'm going to invite Michael Saylor should come to Boca and join us in person. And
be my guest. Be my guest and invite him. But I'll bet you a lot of money he won't come.
I know. Just one final thought. You're saying about quotes you want to frame. Well, I don't know if you know this, but a long time ago you told me no way out, reset. And I have that printed at the entryway of my house. And I look at that every day. So I'm preparing for what you warned me about years ago.
Well, you're welcome.
No way out.
Okay.
Reset. Frank Giustra. Hope to see you soon in person.
You will. I'll see you. See you in Boca Raton.
July I will. There you go. And
care.
I hope everyone else will come out and join us. Thank you all for watching this very important, special breaking edition of the Daniela Cambone Show here on ITM Trading. We'll have more for you coming your way. Sign up, danielacambone.com. We'll see you soon.